But tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce Carol Thielen-Schmidt and Ginny Candioto Siegel. Sorry about that. Candioto Siegel, who are the great-granddaughters of Bailey's Harbor pioneer Conrad Faust. Faust's name is not familiar to many present-day Bailey's Harbor people because he and his wife raised 5 children at their farm at the end of Summit Road, but every one of those children was a girl. And so, of course, as they married, their surnames changed, and so the Faust name kind of just, I don't know, it just went away in the town. Some of you may remember Frank and Katie Faust Candioto, who lived in the farmhouse, well, in the 50s and the 40s, because I remember when I was a child knowing that name. They sold eggs and produce from the farm while they lived there. The old farmhouse takes a center stage in this story. It still remains a kind of like the heart of the family. It's where everybody returns to reunite, and it's been renovated. You'll hear about that. Very interesting. And you might want to keep your ears peeled for a strange conglomeration of words that you're going to hear tonight. You'll hear millinery, Hans Christian Andersen, Albrecht III, and beatification. Kind of an odd little collection of words, but it all fits into their master story. So I'll turn them over, or turn you over to them, or them over to you. I don't know, I guess it doesn't matter. Either way.
Either way, thank you very much, Leanne.
You're very welcome. I thank you.
That was really great.
For those of you that don't know, I am Ginny Candioto Siegel.
And I am Carol Thielen-Schmidt.
And tonight we want to tell you the story of our great-great-grandparents. One great, of our great-grandparents who came over from Armsheim, Germany in 1882. We want to tell you the story of this old house, how Conrad Faust built a home here from this house that's been in our family. Sure. Okay, that's been in our family 136 years. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. Family history tells us that Conrad and Elizabeth wanted to get married when they were in Germany, but they were of a different economic class. Conrad was wealthy and Elizabeth wasn't. Also, in 1881, there was a lot of civil unrest in Germany. There was a lot of censorship of the press and anyone with progressive ideas. And as my father remembered Conrad as a strong-minded German, I don't think this was a good situation for Conrad. So we feel these two events really made them come to Chicago, or made them come to the United States. Family lore tells us a few interesting stories. The first is that the Faust family were instrumental in developing the printing press with Gutenberg, both with financial aid and with tinkering, because they were in improving the press. The Fausts were always known as tinkerers. Another story was that we're related to Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Emperor. We were always very proud of this fact, except the last week we've learned that most people of European descent are also related to Charlemagne. So 75% of you here are related to Charlemagne, but we still feel that we're special. That we had a relative who lived in Germany for many years, and he was able to trace our relatives back to the 1400s. The earlier records were usually kept in churches, so they were lost through wars and through fires. This is our coat of arms.
And what it says is, the Fausts of Rheinhessen are an old and good family, coming forth as a fist thrust from a flame. The name Faust means fist. The closed helmet with the stag on it symbolizes the strength and nobility of this family. This coat of arms is given by King Albrecht III in the year 1438.
Another family lore is that a distant cousin of our great-grandmother Elizabeth's is Anne Catherine Emmerich. She lived from 1774 to 1824, and during her life, she was considered a mystic. She experienced the phenomena of the stigmata, the wounds of Christ. She also had mystical visions that were about the life of Christ, and those were set forth in 2 books. In 1992, she was put up for beatification, and in July 2003, she was given that status by Pope Paul, and that's the last step before sainthood. In 2004, renewed interest in these books developed because Mel Gibson used scenes from these books to develop scenes in his movie, The Crucifixion. They came from a little town outside of Frankfurt called Armsheim. They took their voyage here through Hamburg and through France and then over to New York, a trip of about 4,800 miles. Elizabeth came first. She came on the ship Silesia in June of 1881, and then Conrad followed on the Herder a month later. And actually, then they came to Germantown, which is outside of Milwaukee County, in 1881. They were married there July 20th, 1882. Last Friday would have been their 136th year anniversary. The newly married couple stayed in Germantown for 1 year. Conrad was listed as a farmer. Then they headed to Bailey's Harbor because Elizabeth had an older sister, Anna, who lived here. And the only story, I'm going to go back. I'm sorry. They came over on the 2 ships. And we're going to tell you later about the family story, how they came over on these 2 ships, but ended up on the Love Boat. Okay, but back to our grandparents. So they settled in Germantown in Milwaukee in 1881. They got married there 136 years ago. They stayed for about 1 year, and Conrad was listed as a farmer. Then they came in 1882 to Bailey's Harbor because Elizabeth had an older sister here, Anna. The only information we could find out about Anna is that she went to a fancy ball in February 1886 at Hendricks. I don't know where Hendricks is. Somebody thought perhaps it was on the property where the Florian is now. When Conrad and Elizabeth arrived in Bailey's Harbor in 1882, they bought 133 acres. This is Red Cherry Road, this is E, and this is Summit. So they had all the land around here, 133 acres. They bought it from a widow, Ellen Hanna. She had gotten it in 1862 from Abraham Lincoln in a land grant. Now, he paid $1,400 cash for this land in 1882. I looked online. They said that would be the equivalent of $33,000 cash now. And keep in mind, that doesn't take into account any appreciation of the property. So yes, we know Conrad was a very wealthy man. In 1917, he bought another piece of property across from his farm, which would have been right there. Okay. The picture on your left, when he bought the property, it had a small house on it. The house would have looked like this, but the siding would have been this pieced together boards. The house consisted of 3 bedrooms upstairs, a kitchen downstairs, a bedroom downstairs, and a milk room. In 1899, Conrad went back to Germany. He was the oldest boy of 5 children, so he went back for an inheritance. And when he came back, he changed the farmhouse into 6 bedrooms upstairs, 1 for each of his daughters, and we feel in the time that was pretty progressive for a man to really, treat his daughters that well. So 6 bedrooms upstairs, 1 bedroom downstairs, kitchen, living room, dining room, and a milk room. I love this picture. The girls look like they're all suspended in midair, but if you look closely, they're sitting on an old rail split fence, and even the cow is looking at the camera. This is our grandmother. We'll talk more about her later, Kate Candioto. And then this is the youngest daughter, Louise. These 2 daughters were the only ones that stayed in the Door County area. So that's basically who we're going to end up talking about now.
Okay. Here's a couple other pictures of our grandmother and her sisters, and taken in about the early 1900s, maybe a little later. And then the picture on the bottom is my grandmother and 2 of her sisters and a friend of theirs having ice cream down in Sturgeon Bay. The girls, great-grandpa was a farmer, and what he would do when he was out working in the fields, what he did is he farmed from the back of the house down to E. Okay, that at one time was all cleared. Now it's completely filled with woods. But when it was time to come in, Grandma would go upstairs and hang a sheet out the 2nd-story window so that he knew when it was time to come in and have either lunch or supper. The other story that I really like to tell, and we've learned these stories from our parents, basically, anything they passed down, is that during World War I, Grandpa, they wanted to know in town how come old man Faust had men working in the fields, because there weren't a lot of men up here during the First World War, so they wanted to know how in the world he ever got to have all these people out there working in the fields. Well, if you'll notice that picture there, he had 5 daughters. So what he did in those times, he had them dress in pants, shirts, and a hat, and made them go out and work in the field. Okay, so he really didn't have men. He had his daughters, and he put them to work. Here's Conrad and Elizabeth again. Here's his naturalization papers, which he got in about 1913, and in 1915, he became a citizen. But Conrad was, we learned a lot of stuff about, we not only had family lore, stories, and then a lot of information we found on the Door County Library newspaper archives. And we have formed a much better picture of our early ancestors and what happened in the county. Through the newspaper articles, we found that they were quite the movers and shakers. Conrad was a colorful and character, and like Ginny said, a strong-minded German. In October 1st of 1885, Conrad and George Mance, who was also lived in Bailey's Harbor, voted illegally, as they weren't citizens yet, at a special election held in September 15th. So they were reprimanded to the circuit court down in Sturgeon Bay for trial. Their bonds were set at $500 apiece. Now, that's a lot of money in that day. Now, I could never find anything about the trial. I have no idea how it turned out, except he was eventually back home working again. So he left Germany because he wanted to be free, but unfortunately he took a little bit of an advantage of it. And the other thing it had said in one of the articles is that he didn't want to sign up to be a citizen right away because he was afraid of being mustered into the army. So it was interesting, to say the least. Elizabeth, meanwhile, she was taking care of the house and the girls and entertaining quite a bit. Through many years, we saw people coming and going all the time at the farmhouse. It seemed like we had a swinging door. They were always entertaining some way or another. But this one article that was in the paper really got to me, so I'm going to read to you exactly what it said. In October of a 1915 paper, it mentions, and this is a direct quote, promoters of women's suffrage were royally entertained at the Faust home Sunday evening. A dainty lunch was served by the hostess, and many interesting topics were discussed. The main one, equal suffrage. So I also read that the women down in Sturgeon Bay, they had to have their meetings in a cemetery, okay, which was quite interesting. So it showed that apparently the people in Bailey's Harbor were much more ahead of their times, okay. So anyway, I thought that was very interesting.
Now, this is what Conrad Faust Homestead would have looked like in the early 1930s. And it was quoted in the newspaper that Conrad was one of the most enterprising farmers of this part of the county. Conrad cleared the land and raised cows, pigs, chickens, and geese. And the Faust family also had a cranberry bog behind Kangaroo Lake that flooded when the lake was dammed. And we really don't have any other information about that, too. I would like to point out that this barn was already on the property when Conrad bought it in 1882, so we feel that barn must have been from 1862 when Miss Hannah had the property. You can see a silo here. We'll show you our grandfather digging for that silo. And then this would have been half the house, and then Conrad had added to it. Conrad also had a lime kiln on the property. This is what it might have looked like when it was new, and this is what it looks like now, just a pile of rocks. Lime kiln was used, they would put lime stones in it and heat it up for a long time at a very high temperature, and the stones would turn to ash. The stones would turn to ash, and then Conrad used that as fertilizer for his crops, and also it was a product used to make chinking.
Ladies, pretend you're talking to the people in the back of the room, because I can't turn their mic up anymore.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, here is Conrad with a friend. We have no idea who that person is. He was pretty much, the pictures we did have, pretty much he had a pipe in his hand a good part of the time. In one of the articles in the paper, on June 16th, 1900, the buggy that he was riding in, the seat came undone. He fell down between the horse and the wagon, rolled over him. He had ran over one of his limbs. He had cuts and bruises. Took a long time for them to patch him, and he was badly hurt. And in one of the newspapers, it said it was one of the worst accidents that had occurred here in many a day. And the only surprise is that Mr. Faust was not killed outright. And that was a quote from Dr. Voigt.
Now, we said that only two daughters really stayed in Door County. This is the youngest daughter, Louise, with her husband to our right is Clarence Smith, and that's Conrad, the elderly gentleman on the porch. So Louise wanted to take an old log house that was on the 40 acres that Conrad bought in 1917 across from the farm. She wanted to remodel this farmhouse and this log house, and none of the contractors would do it. They said they would build her a new house. So they gathered the stones from the property. They used the same foundation. You can tell the shapes of the homes are identical. They used the same foundation, used local stone, and built her house that her and her husband lived in for many years. Right now, many of you know Jody Jessup and Doc Heidi. This is the house that they live in. Conrad also helped clear the cemetery over St. Mary's Cemetery at the end of Red Cherry Road. He received many plots. And so this is a picture. We've added our grandparents' pictures to it because although they're not buried here, we wanted to remember them. So their picture is there. We added Anne Catherine Emmerich's picture. because she has always helped me. She's somebody, it's my go-to beatified lady that I go to when I need something, and she has to do a few miracles before she's a saint. So I just wanted other people to know about her, so I added her name to that. Conrad died when he was 88, and Elizabeth was 87. So I think we have some longevity in our families. Now, the rest of our stories are going to be about Frank and Catherine Candioto. That was the second to the oldest sister that ended up, or daughter, that ended up here. She made her way to Chicago through Milwaukee, working in millinery stores, making hats. And I love these pictures because can you imagine how rural, this is around 1913, because this is a Willis car, and it's 1913 model. So these hats are sort of beautiful to be wearing in a very rural area like we have here at that time. She went to Chicago, met Frank Candioto. They were married in Holy Name Cathedral, and they made their living sewing and selling hats. This is one of their millinery stores. They had 3 of them. We're not sure if they had them all at the same time or serially. So this is our grandfather, Frank Candioto, and then that's Carol's mother, Betty, and that's one of the stores where they worked. One of the stores was on Lincoln Avenue, which is, if you're familiar with Chicago, is called Lincoln Square. Another store is now where the where now is Willis Tower or the Sears Tower. And the third store was where the current entrance to Millennial Park is. So they were in some great locations.
Okay. My grandparents stayed on the farm during the summer months, but until they retired. So they stayed in the summer, but in the winter they were back down in Chicago with the business. Over the years, many people really know the name Candioto because my grandfather, once they retired, they sold vegetables and mostly eggs there. Okay. What's interesting is that over the years, I usually have at least one group or family or one person come and ask me if the same person owns that house. And, I go, yeah, and how do you know? And I question them, and they always tell me their memories. And it's really neat. Over the years, I've learned a lot of different stories. But the one that really sticks in my mind is there was a woman that she was one of 6 children. They were very, very poor. And what my grandparents did when they weren't living there year-round, they would let people either rent the house, or if they had no money, they let them stay for free. And this woman's family with the 6 children was able to stay there free. Not only did they live there in the wintertime, they lived there through the summer because they had no place to stay. And so that means that in the summertime, my grandparents and our parents were living in the house at the same time. But she said the best part of the whole thing was at Easter time, everyone in the family got a Easter hat from Chicago, the latest style. So that was really a wonderful memory that she got to share with me.
So Kate and Frank had 4 children. Mike, my father, who died last year at 102. Then Betty, Carol's mother, who passed away at the age of 87. The next child was Helen. She died at the age of 89. And Katie is still living in California. She's 94. She is living with her husband, who will be 101 in September. There's that longevity again. This is the homestead through the years. The Candiotos, Frank and Kate, retired to the farm in the 1940s. They added indoor plumbing, but no heating. They had a few cows and chickens, but mostly they raised their grandchildren. And there is my grandfather digging for the Silo Foundation. Can you imagine even digging? I can barely put a plant in without coming across some rocks and everything. So, and you can notice there's the silo. The silo still stands today, but that's what it must have looked like in the early 1940s.
Okay.
Sorry.
And this is my grandmother and grandfather there, and they did have a farmhand for a while, and you can see, you can just barely see him in the back. Like I said, Grandpa and Grandma, they sold vegetables out of the house, and they sold eggs. So a lot of people still kind of remember them doing that. And the other thing is, today I still have people, when I explain to them where I live, they go, "Oh, you mean the old Candioto place?" So people still really kind of know it as that. Now, the next picture is a fish picture. And I just want to tell you that we have hundreds of fish pictures, but you are not going to see them all. We just picked a couple of these old ones because I thought it was kind of interesting. That's my grandma and grandpa out fishing in Kangaroo Lake. Pretty much all the fishing that they did was out of Kangaroo Lake. And over the years, this is when they're a little older, as you can see. They're still there with more fish, okay? And there's Ginny's dad, and this little lady over on the side is what we called her Little Grandma. She is actually my grandfather's mother, and they immigrated from Sicily. And she used to spend time on the farm. When we were real little, we kind of just barely remember her. So now I'm going to tell you a fish story, because I have to. And like I said, we have hundreds of pictures through the years. But on one day, my grandpa decides to go fishing. He puts on his waders, and I'm going to tell you how he had to be saved from Kangaroo Lake. He puts on his waders. He goes out back behind the farmhouse. Now, back behind the farmhouse, it is swampy, it is muddy, and the bottom of the lake has a marl bottom. So now Grandpa's gone all day, and we're thinking, wow, we are going to have a fish dinner tonight. Well, at dinner time, he's still not back. So we go, and Grandma sends one of the boys down, and come to find out he was stuck in the lake all day. All day. And so we had to get into town, and had to get some men, and they came back and pulled Grandpa out. I don't know how many men it took to get him out, but I can tell you that my grandfather never spoke Italian unless he was really mad. So, you know. So the other thing we did, of course, was picking cherries. Everyone picked cherries. When we were younger, we picked cherries for extra money. But they also did it in their time, too. So in the 1800s and the 30s, everyone was picking cherries. We included this picture of my dad because I wanted to tell you about how special a small-town living can be. And my dad was in the service, and he was stationed over in Germany for part of the time. And my mom stayed up here with my grandparents, who had been living up here by then year-round. And so my dad came into New York, and he wanted to let my mom know that he was coming in. So he called Charlie Collins at the Gulls, and for any of you that have been here know that Charlie and Mary own the Gulls. And he asked Charlie to drive out to the farmhouse. He drives out to the farmhouse. My mom is in the field bringing in the cows. He goes out in the field. He gets my mom, brings her back in, and my mom gets to talk to my dad on the phone. Now, Alice Hickey was the telephone operator at that time, and she kept the line open all that time so that my parents could talk. Now, I can tell you that that would never happen in a big town, okay? And the other story we have is now my dad's home on leave, and they hear this terrible noise coming from town. And I can see Patty smiling because she knows. And so they heard this terrible noise coming from town, horns beeping and people yelling. And so they decide to go and investigate and see what's going on. Well, they found out that the war was over. So everybody was in town celebrating. So they went to Panter's, which I believe is the old Florian's. I'm not sure. So they go in and everybody's celebrating. And the bartender gets a call from the sheriff. And the sheriff says, you got to close up because I don't want people driving around the county drunk. So the bartender goes, okay, I'll do that. So he goes over and he locks the door with everyone in. So my mom said they were in there celebrating all night, okay? And that's one of her favorite stories that she told, and that was from my mom. So now, these are some pictures of the house. Now that Grandpa added on, but nothing was really done to it. So they're going to be painting it now. And so I showed you a couple pictures. One of them, which is interesting, that's my dad on the top of the ladder. Why in the world all these people are down here, I have no idea. But it doesn't look like they were helping him paint. But when we started to remodel, this is what we uncovered, is that it wasn't a log home per se, it was slabs, it was wood, there were two levels, inside and outside, and the wood, if you see, it's all different sizes, okay? There's long and short and fat and thin, and it's amazing, they fit together like a puzzle. And then what we did is we had to tear it all off, then we put on Tyvek, and then resided it with cedar. These are some of the pictures when we started to work on the inside and take off the lath and plaster. First of all, I don't know if you guys have ever worked with lath and plaster, and I never did until we started to take it off. And I can tell you, you better put a hat on your head or a scarf, because if you get plaster dust in your hair, it stays like that. Okay, and you never have to worry about your hair messing up, because whatever position it was in, it's staying that way. So what we uncovered, though, was newspapers. And we uncovered newspapers from all over the country, from the 1800s, okay? Because they used it, I'm sure they used it for insulation, okay? And so what's interesting is, if you'll notice down here at the bottom, what surprised us was that they had color. Those are colored pictures. It just was kind of interesting that we never thought that they had color back in those days. But we figured the newspapers were from when the ships maybe came into harbor or people traveling. They never threw papers out. Yeah, obviously, they kept them. We can't be the only farmhouse that has papers glued. That person right up there is my niece Catherine, in case she looks kind of familiar to anybody. She was there helping. What I did is, because we couldn't really get the paper off and have it stay, so I would take pictures of some of the things. And so on this one at the top, it says Hans Christian Andersen comes to the U.S. Now, we never did find another paper up there, and we couldn't find if he ever actually got there or not, but that's where he was supposed to come. And then the other one, like you said, you can see it's from Philadelphia in 1868. So it's too bad that we couldn't get some of the newspapers off, because it would have been fun to see all of the stuff that was really on there. Oops. Okay, so if walls could talk. So I brought these two pictures because every night I would come home from work, and the contractor he would put everything on the floor that he found, okay? And so most of it, believe me, was fuzz and mouse stuff and all kinds of stuff, but he did not really find this, but he found a portion of a shoe that was all eaten up and mostly gone, and fur and fuzz all over it. And we wondered about why that shoe was in the wall. And we checked, and the superstition is, when you're building, at that time, when you were building a house and you put an old shoe in there, it would ward off evil. So that was in the wall. And then the other picture, this one here, is, so I get home another day, and there's this thing laying on the floor, and it's black. I mean black. It was filthy, filthy dirty, and I really didn't know what it was. I picked it up, and I wasn't sure, and my grandmother didn't like the iron beds with the foot on it, so she used to have my grandfather hacksaw off the bottoms of the iron beds, which I still have, actually. And I thought maybe it was the top to one of the bed things. I don't know. So I put it in some water and just was soaking it. And as luck would have it, I happened to be talking to Ginny that day, and I'm walking around the kitchen, And I turned around and I told her, I said, I found this black thing by the floor there. I didn't know what it was. And I looked over, and that little face was looking right at me. So it's pretty cool. I told the contractor the next day, and of course, he says, oh, I never found a body. And I go, you won't find a body because they're cloth, And so it was somebody's nest is what I think it was. Okay.
Now, this next picture is for Charlie Tischler. Ready? Remember that? All right, I'll let you, Carol, tell you the story. We harassed the boys.
We harassed the boys.
I thought we were the leaders, you were the chasers.
Yeah, I think you chased. Okay. As my grandfather got older, he couldn't really drive anymore. So at 15, they had a thing where they had a hardship permit. So I was able to get one, and so we drove that car around, and we did call it the Bomber. We actually had it painted, the Bomber, on the front, and had a lot of fun in there. And of course, many times, as Charlie can attest, my grandfather was hardly ever in that car. Okay, okay. But my grandmother, she was pretty darn cool, and she said, now listen, if the constable ever stops you, you can tell him that your grandma said it was okay to drive. Okay. Now, I can tell you that I can honestly say it, we were never stopped by the constable, so we must have been doing okay. All right.
Okay, as we mentioned, there's 9 cousins, and we spent our summers here. Our parents would drop us off Memorial Day weekend and pick us up Labor Day weekend. They were pretty lucky, I tell you. So here we are, then and now. This is Carol, and that's Carol there. Here I am here, and there I am. We have Peter here. He's here tonight, and Jim is here, and Jim is, we're in the back there. So this was a reunion we had in '03, and I want to point out that my mantle was from the original barn built prior to 1882. We included this picture. I did not think there was anything going on at the reunion that I did not know about. And lo and behold, Carol shows up with these, straw hats that we used to wear in the 50s to keep the deer flies away. And the amazing thing was that they still existed. At one time, the farm was owned by 4 families. People would take whatever they had their eye on, they would take things. And then Carol did extensive remodeling starting in 2000. So it was just amazing that these, really insignificant straw hats survived all that. And there are the boys wearing them. There's Peter again that's here, and Jim wearing the same straw hats.
Okay, so now we've done with the house as much as we were going to do. So I decided we really needed to take the barn down, because with the grandchildren, I didn't want them going in and out. It was too dangerous. So Ginny and I walked around the barn, and we realized that the barn door was in pretty good shape. So the guys trimmed it up, as you can see in the picture, trimmed it up. We sent that barn door down to my sons in Texas. And by the way, in Sturgeon Bay, we were the first barn door they ever shipped. And they were quite excited about it. And they trimmed it down, decorated it, and shipped it back. Okay, it did cost a lot of money, just in case you want to know. But so we did that. And then here's the barn. As you can see, that's our grandpa over to the side, and that's some of the chickens that we had. So we had a couple. I think that this barn here was the part that was the original. And then these 2 were added, and that's the chicken coops. Okay. When we decided to take down the barn, the same man that helped us with the house, he helped us with taking the barn down. So they tried to take a log down on this side, and you can see it's just barely out. Then they hooked it up on this side, And you can see what happened. Nothing. Okay? So one of my sons came up to me and said, "Mom, we'll be taking the barn down one log at a time." So they finally were able to tip it to the side, and this is why they couldn't do it, because of that spike. There were 4 spikes on 4 corners of that barn, and they drove them down into 3 to 4 logs on the top. Okay? Okay, look out. And this is the spike. Okay, so I want to know the man that drove that down through 3 or 4 logs, okay? And I mean, it was amazing. And one of my sons says, well, they probably augered it, okay? And maybe they did, but they didn't have electric augers. It had to be by hand. So in retrospect, the barn would have never fallen down.
Okay. So here we are to the present day. Approximately 70 acres still remain in the family. Cousin Carol, we're all cousins. Cousin Carol has the original farmhouse. This is Summit, and this is Red Cherry Road, and this is Z. Cousin Jim and his wife Joanne retired up here and built a house a few years ago. Peter Thielen and his wife Roberta built a house around 17 or 18 years ago. And my husband Ross and I built a house here about 16 years ago. We spent half our time here and half our time outside of Chicago in Park Ridge. So the property that Conrad bought in 1882 is still in the family 136 years later, and we have 7 generations of his descendants. Now, remember in the beginning, I told you we were going to tell you the story of how the Faust came over on the 2 ships and the family ended up on the Love Boat? In May of 2001, our California cousin, Mary Ann Lay, married Ted Lange. Ted played the bartender on the Love Boat, Isaac. So that is how we're ending our evening tonight, on the Love Boat. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you both so much. That was a great story, a great family, and I think it so deserved to be told because, you know, it was started, the family in Bailey's Harbor was started by this couple whose name is all but lost in our history, just because he didn't happen to have any sons, you know? And I think it's kind of wonderful to see so many descendants of the family here, and to hear the wonderful stories, the stories of kindness, stories that have religious meaning for the family. I love the barn spike. It's almost one of my favorite stories, I have to say. Although getting stuck in Kangaroo Lake was pretty good too. But you can see that lore is something that lives on in their family, and you know we all have that. But this is a story that I think is really worth hearing, especially since Conrad deserves to be noticed a little bit, he and his wife. Thank you, Howard. Well, we will, sure, absolutely. There are a lot of members of the family, and I want to get, as we have done many times in the past, if you can all come so that a photograph can be taken, then Laddie will put that at the end of his video. Do you usually take the picture, Laddie, or does somebody else?
Somebody else does. I just take it if no one else is available.
I'm not very good at that. I usually just get armpits and earlobes.
Could someone hold the spike up so I get a picture of that? You held it in the dark.
Yeah, get over it.
Up high. Now pound it in.
I'm looking over at the table so you can go over and try and to see how heavy it really is. And there were 4 of these.
I think you're right, Carol, that bar never would have fallen down. So does anybody have questions or comments that you would like to share right now?
Well, Gibby and I were just talking that was probably forged by August Zahn that long of a spike. So where else?
Yeah, that probably was. That's a cool tie-in,
It
yeah.
would have been about 1862,
Oh, 1862.
because the barn was there.
Oh, okay, that was way before his time then.
Wow. Well, I know they always had a blacksmith in town. It seems to me I read about them constantly in the old newspapers, but I don't remember who. I certainly don't. Yes, sir?
Yeah, catching all those fish there at Kangaroo Lake and eating them, do you think that added to the longevity of your?
Well, you know what I think one was, everyone remembers Conrad Faust walking to town every day. It's about 2 miles, and he would get a shot and a beer.
Shot in the beer.
It was a good 2 miles, probably depending which bar he went to, maybe a little bit longer.
So he did that until he moved back to Illinois. That's what my dad said, he walked every day into town for a shot in the beer. So that could add to it.
I just have one quick story to add about our grandfather, Myron Candioto.
That's my dad. Oh,
Yeah, or my grandfather, of course, his health was fading, and my grandmother would say, "Okay, Pete, go into town with your grandfather in the car, and tell him when he forgets to shift. No seatbelt. There's a man, obviously with failing health, but it was interesting rides to town."
Peter, how old were you?
I think I was probably 10.
Yes.
I didn't know at that point when to tell him, because I thought the engine was going to come right through the hood. So I knew it was time to shift the car.
And I think Charlie Tischler was one of the guys that helped our grandfather out of the swamp.
No, my dad.
Oh, your dad
I remember when he got caught in the mud.
Yeah.
A bunch of guys from town. You see, I just lived down into that gravel road
Right.
Okay.
where I grew up.
Because we don't know how many men came to pull him out.
I don't,
Yeah.
that's mostly ropes. I was just a kid.
Anything
Let's
further?
have everybody stand up from the family.
Yes, let's see all those Faust
Come
descendants.
on, let's go. Jim, Joanne, come on. We have
I'm just. Oh, yes. Say it into the mic.
Okay, I just want to thank Leanne. She was the person that kept kind of badgering us to do this. And I have to say that we really enjoyed doing it because we did find out more about our family through the newspaper articles, which we had no idea that they were even there, and that's thanks to Leanne. And the other thing that I'd like to tell you is when Leanne does these programs herself, she does a lot of research, and I think she needs a hand in itself because
Oh.
it's a lot.
Thanks, Carol, that was really sweet. But I will say this, it is very gratifying. We've done 30, at least, programs now, and I have never talked to anyone afterwards who wasn't happy about doing it and getting that record, getting it kind of in an organized way, illustrated. And of course, everybody just loves it. People come here, they don't come here to pick you apart. They come here because they approve and they want to encourage it. So it's